Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Redberryweo here, and welcome back to another quick Civil Air Patrol video. In today's video, we are talking about Achievement 5, the drill test. And it is the one that comes out of CAP Pamphlet 60-34. Now, one note that I would like to make at the beginning of this video is that sometimes they update the tests so that it aligns with the current guidance from the Air Force. So as of recording this video, these are the current standards that CAP and the Air Force have outlined for these drill maneuvers. So we will hop into it. There was a comment on my previous video that talked about how cadence should be called, and I just wanted to address that comment in addition to kind of lining it up with the guidance that I had previously shared for the Achievement 4 drill test. So in my last video, I basically said that the way in which the commands are called, like the speed in which the commands are called, is the way that the movements should be conducted. And that is true to an extent. In general, commands that are called should be called in QuickTime, aka it should be 100 to 120 steps per minute or beats per minute. So if you're familiar with music, anytime you see like the little music note, like most times it's like a little quarter note equals and then 120 BPM. That's basically what that is. If you're not familiar with music, don't worry about it. But basically, if you are familiar with the song Stars and Stripes Forever, which you may or may not be, basically the tempo is like this. Dun, 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 dun. And each time that I snap my fingers is a step. So, dun 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 dun. So, when you call commands, you shouldn't just be calling them really slowly. Like, an example that was provided in the comment was hand salute. You're not just going to be like, hand salute, and then very slowly do it. No, it's supposed to be between 100 and 120 beats per minute. The thing I was talking about, to just lead into that, is if the person calls at 100 beats per minute, it's going to feel slower than 120 beats per minute. I just want to discuss this because as a blossoming, growing in the program sergeant, because this is the Achievement 5 video, you may or may not be familiar with that, so just be aware, 100 to 120 beats per minute, or like steps per minute, is what the timing should be when you call commands, just generally speaking. If you need to slow stuff down for like training, or if you're doing something for a parade, then you'd go towards more 100 beats per minute. And if you're doing just normal training operations and just getting people out there, marching them around, you're more likely going to be closer to that 120 beats per minute. And I personally always use Stars and Stripes Forever for knowing the beat, because I had to play that song all the time in band, and so that is ingrained in me. And I was also required to memorize it at one point, but that's a whole other tangent. So just keep in mind, 120 to 120 beats per minute is the speed at which commands should be called. So just wanted to add that little caveat to the beginning of this video. So let's get into these 21 different drill movements that you are supposed to call in the Achievement 5 drill test. The first one is fall in, and a lot of people don't do this one correctly, which is not great, but I will give you 1 and 2, okay? And so I want you to hear both examples, and I want you to think which one is correct, which one's incorrect, and we'll talk about why after. So the first example is fall in. Second one, fall in. Which one do you think is correct, 1 or 2? I mean, I can't see you, but in theory you may have said 2 or 1. 2 is the correct answer. The way that it's supposed to be called is no pause in between them, just flat inflection. And inflection is like the pitch in which the command is called. So it's just fall in. Same thing with fall out, fall out. And a lot of people like to add a pause where they're like, fall in, or fall in. No, that is incorrect. So just keep in mind that on the drill test scorecard, whoever is grading you is required to follow and make sure that you are doing it correctly. And it literally says, does not contain a pause between fall and in. That's one of the grading criteria. So keep in mind that in this test, they're not only grading you on can you call the command sort of right, it's basically grading you, do you know your stuff? Do you know the preparatory command and the command of execution? Do you know the timing? And are you able to get it right on 21 different maneuvers? I can't get over how long this test is. But it's really critical that you practice, and try to practice with 2 elements because this test requires 2 elements. Do your best to practice as much as you can. Try to do it with your friends. Do it with other CAP cadets. Just don't make the first time you are doing this test the first time you are leading the flight in these maneuvers, because that is not setting yourself up for success. Okay, so I just wanted to put that out there. And we'll move on to the next one, which is dress right dress. In dress right dress, you call the command dress right dress, and then the cadets in your flight will do their thing, or they'll be like that, and they'll be like that. You are supposed to check the alignment whenever you do that command. The reason why you use dress right dress is because you're trying to make sure everyone is lined up correctly. And so basically, you're going to go to the side of the flight, you're going to check down the first element, you're going to make sure they're aligned, and if they need to move, then they're going to do little choppy steps. You might say, hey, Cadet Jones, you need to take a small step forward, and they might do their little choppy step forward. Or you might tell someone to take little choppy steps back. They're always supposed to get in alignment with whoever the element leader is, because technically the element leaders should be in the correct positions, and everyone else needs to base it off of what the element leader is doing. So, if I'm correct and the person next to me, which is also me, is incorrect, then that person will need to adjust, and not the person who is the element leader. And then the last part of this command that I don't always see people doing is, after checking the alignment for each of the elements, you face back to the right, and once you've gotten aligned with that first flank, then you are going to move 3 steps forward and do a left face. So instead of, because everyone's facing that direction, you're going to be facing this way. Okay? And so then after you say, ready, front, you go back to the position that you were in, where you are 3 paces in front of the center of the flight. And then the next maneuver is right face. And I'm just going to call back to one of my older videos, the column versus line formation video. That's a helpful one, so I just want you to review that if you're not familiar with the difference between the two. But essentially, you're doing right face in order to get them into column formation. And when you call the command, it's not right face. It should be right face. And it's a H sound, an H sound, instead of a F sound, because that is not as articulated as haste, because it's like cutting off the haste. So it's haste instead of face. Okay? So that's a common mistake that I've seen, where they say right face, right haste is the correct way to call it. Next one is forward march. Same thing with face. Instead of a sound, it's a h sound. So forward harch instead of forward march. You can hear how march is like a softer tone rather than harch. So forward harch. And just as a note, with those 2 movements, the main things that you're being graded on are the commands called confidently and with a snap. So right haste has more of a snap than right haste. And there's a lot of things wrong with what I just did, but one of them is it's not snappy. Like right haste, right haste. Okay? So you can hear the difference between the two. The second one that I just did in that little set right there was the correct way to call it. The next movement that we'll talk about is the column right. So, column right is called on the right foot. And just generally, whenever you are going a direction, whether it's to the left, whether it is to the right, it's always going to be called on the direction that you are going. So, if the flight is going to the left, that means you will call it on the left foot, regardless of if it's a flank, if it's an extend or column. All of those to the left It's always going to be called on the left foot. If you're going to the right, it's always going to be called on the right. So, the way it's called is column right, harch. And then the way that it's done is, you know how your flight is just going like this and they're maintaining column formation. So just remember, the preparatory command is called on the right foot. So column right is the preparatory command. Harch is the command of execution. So if we're marching and this is your right foot, column right, harch, and then that moves into that maneuver. Okay? Pretty straightforward. And then of course, after any column movements, you have to tell them to do forward because they're currently in half steps so that everyone in the flight can catch up. So once everyone in the flight has caught up, after doing that column movement, you'll say forward, harch, with the same H sound in the command of execution. Okay, then we've got close and extend march while marching. Close march is where the flight's like this, and then the last element is gonna kind of stay in their spot, and then the first, like if we've got two elements, element 1, element 2, element 2 is gonna stay in their spot, and element 1 is moving to the side like this, right? So because element 1 is moving to their right, that means it's called on the right foot. And as soon as the command of execution is called, this element is going to go into half steps. This one is going to do their pivot 45, one step, pivot 45, and then go into half steps as they're moving forward. So calling it, you would say close, harch, and then they do their thing. And you say forward, harch on the left foot. So an easy thing to remember is when you are saying forward harch, just starting a normal drill maneuver, and just starting marching in general, you're calling it, and they're starting with their left foot. So when you're doing forward harch with this movement, the preparatory command and the command of execution are called on the left foot. So it's forward, harch, and then they'll go into full steps again instead of just the half steps. And then we go on to the extend march. Extend march, this element is moving away. They're going whoop while marching. And since they're moving to the left, that means it's called on the left foot. So extend, harch, and then they do their thing. And they do their one step and pivot back to the front again. And then go into half steps. And as we remember from the last command, you're calling forward harch again on the left foot. All right, next one is change step. Change step is called on the right foot. And so that's the preparatory command, and the command of execution is called on the right foot as well. Next one is count cadence count. And this is a very common one that I have seen many different ways. So I'll call it in two different ways. So there's count cadence count and count cadence count. Which way do you think it is? 1 or 2? The correct answer is 1. And this is actually a part of the grading criteria. They're really trying to phase out the count, cadence, count. It's count, cadence, count. And then everyone's like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So, because you are trying to make sure everyone is in step and they're counting the cadence together, the preparatory command is called on the left foot, and the command of execution is also called on the left foot. Okay, so then we do flight halt, and it's just flight, halt, that is all. And then we move on to left step. So it's called left step, harch. Now keep in mind, if your flight is moving to the left and you're facing towards your flight, that means you'll be going to your right while they go to their left. Okay? That's just something to remember. People don't always remember that. So, if you are facing your flight, then they're going to go the opposite direction that you are. So if you want them to go that way, and you're facing towards them, then you need to make sure that you're calling it in the direction you want them to go and not necessarily yourself. So sometimes people get a little bit mixed up with that. Just think about it. Do I want them going left or right? Which way are they facing? And then call it the way that you want them to go. Another tricky area that I've seen with people trying to halt the flight is halting the flight correctly after left step. Think about when you're doing the preparatory command and the command of execution. Normally it feels like there's like a beat in between them. So, if you're doing left steps, and it's just kind of doing this, should you call it when your feet are apart or when your feet are together? It's going to take 2 beats. So if we did it like this, let's say your feet are apart and we do flight, halt, their feet are going to be apart. So it's important to make sure that the preparatory command and the command of execution are called with the heels together. So it would be called like this. Flight, halt. See how my heels are still together? So just make sure that when you're doing left step, you've got the heels together, and then they'll end with their heels together too. Another common mistake, not necessarily related to the test that I just wanted to bring up, is I've seen people leading the flight without actually doing drill with them. Like, they'll try calling cadence, but they won't actually be in step with the flight. Or they won't actually do maneuvers with their flight. Whenever you're doing drill, like if you're doing a parade, the flight sergeant just doesn't like walk around. They're doing professional maneuvers, being uniform with their flight while leading the flight. And another thing to keep in mind is that whatever behavior you're modeling as someone leading the flight is what the people in your flight are going to emulate when they are leading flights. So you want to make sure, as best you can, do the maneuvers with them, and be professional, be respectful, and do your best to maintain excellent standards while you are conducting drill and ceremonies. We've halted the flight after doing left steps, so then they need to do left face, which would be called left haste. Remember the H sound when you're saying face. The reason why is because you want the element leaders to be the rightmost person when you're doing dress right dress. And you also want them to be the furthest right person in the flight when you're doing open ranks. Whenever you do an inspection, the flight is supposed to really be in line formation because you have your most experienced people like in charge of the rest of the element in that rightmost position. And so when inspections are happening, that person who's in charge will then have their element members next to them. The next one is open ranks march, and it's called open ranks march. And from your position, immediately after the command of execution, which is march, you're going to take a 45-degree angle. You're going to go directly next to that first element leader. You're going to do a right face, and you're going to look down the element, and you're going to check alignment. You're not supposed to wiggle or move your body. You're supposed to keep it where it is and check alignment by doing small choppy steps in your spot. And then you'll move on to the second element, third element. In this test, you only have 2 elements, but you'll move on to the next element, you'll check, and once you're done, you will go back up to the front, and when you're next to that first element leader, you do your 3 paces forward, and then you're going to do a left face. You're just going to stay in that position until you say, ready, front, and then after saying, ready, front, you're going to move from your position that's like along the side, and you're going to be centered in the middle of the flight. And then we've got close ranks march, and all you need to do is call that command with a snap. So close ranks march is the proper way in order to call that command. Then we've got right face. That one's not graded because you already were graded on that one, but it's good to call it correctly. Right face. And after facing to the right, you're going to do calm the files from the right, forward march. So you've got your element leaders that are supposed to do their thing. So that means that you have to have a pause between the preparatory command and the command of execution. Does that make sense? So basically, you want to make sure you're not singing it. Like some people are like, calm the files from the right, forward. No. Calm the files from the right, forward. And then people will say forward or stand fast. And then you say march, and that last element is going to go forward because they're the ones furthest on the right. And then they'll say forward, and then they go forward and they do what they need to for the other elements. And then the next one is flight halt. And so they should just be halted and flight halt. And then you just fall them out. Some people say fall out. Again, just like what I was talking about at the very beginning of this, fallout is just fall out. And that's it. So, my word of advice is practice as much as you can to be confident and comfortable with the material. For some people, it'll be easier to pick up. For some, it might take a while. But if you pass this drill test, then you should be meeting all of the standards that I've outlined in this video and comfortable with them, so that if you need to provide someone else with feedback on how to lead drill, like let's say you're a flight sergeant and you're giving feedback to an element leader leading drill, then they are also learning the correct standards that are outlined by Civil Air Patrol and the US Air Force. So if you have any questions for me, please feel free to include them in the comments down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and that is all, folks. Until next time, toodles.